I never thought a single piece of paper could change everything. But there I was, standing in the dusty office of Edward Nelson, the family lawyer I'd never heard of until 3 days ago, watching him slide a deed across his mahogany desk. The deed to my grandmother's ranch. A grandmother I'd been told died when I was 2. A grandmother who, according to this lawyer, had been searching for me my entire life. My hands shook as I picked up the document. Frances Clark, the social worker who'd driven me here, squeezed my shoulder. She'd been the only constant in my 17 years bouncing between foster homes, and even she looked stunned. The ranch was mine, 300 acres in Cedar Valley, Montana, a place I'd never been, inherited from a woman I'd never known existed. But I'm getting ahead of myself. Let me take you back to where this really started, because the story of how I went from being the girl everyone pitied to owning more land than anyone in my high school could imagine begins 3 weeks earlier on my 18th birthday. Before we see how this ends, tell us where you're watching from and hype this video in the comments. I was packing my single duffel bag in the group home when Frances knocked on my door. I'd been dreading this moment for months. Buying out of the system meant I was on my own, with nothing but the clothes on my back and a voucher for a studio apartment in the worst part of town. The other kids had been brutal about it for weeks. "Look at Hannah Stewart," Tyler Edwards had sneered just that morning. 18 and still nobody wants her. At least the rest of us know why we're unwanted. The laughter that followed still echoed in my ears. I'd learned not to cry in front of them years ago. Tears only made it worse. Instead, I focused on folding my 3 shirts and 2 pairs of jeans with military precision. Everything I owned fit in one bag. Everything I was fit in even less space. Frances sat on the narrow bed beside me. She'd been my caseworker for 5 years, longer than anyone else had stayed in my life. Her graying hair was pulled back in its usual practical bun, but her eyes held something different today. Something that looked almost like excitement. "Hannah, I need you to sit down for this," she said, though I was already sitting. "I got a call yesterday from a lawyer in Montana, a man named Edward Nelson." Montana might as well have been Mars to me. I'd never been outside of Ohio. I stared at her. Frances shook her head slowly. The words didn't make sense. I'd been told my father was unknown, that my mother had been a teenage runaway who died in a car accident when I was a toddler. No family, no connections, no history beyond the sterile files that followed me from placement to placement. I whispered. The next 3 days passed in a blur of paperwork and disbelief. Frances had to take personal time to drive me to Montana, something she'd never done for any of her other kids. But then again, none of her other kids had inherited a ranch from a grandmother they'd never known existed. We drove through the night, stopping only for walk and fast food. Frances tried to fill in the gaps in my history as we crossed state lines. Eleanor Stewart had been married to my grandfather, David Murphy, who died in Vietnam before my father was born. She'd raised my father, Charles Lopez, alone after taking his stepfather's name when she remarried briefly. Quote 9. Frances explained as we drove through endless farmland. Quote 10. Quote 11. Frances was quiet for a long moment. Quote 12. I pressed my face against the passenger window, watching the landscape change from Ohio's rolling hills to the vast plains of the Midwest. Somewhere out there was a place that belonged to me, a place where someone had wanted me, had been looking for me, even if I'd never known it. We reached Cedar Valley just as the sun was setting on the 3rd day. It was smaller than I'd expected, just a main street lined with weathered buildings and a few side streets branching off into residential areas. The kind of place where everyone knew everyone, where strangers stood out like sore thumbs. Edward Nelson's office was in a converted Victorian house on Main Street. He was older than I'd expected, probably in his 70s, with kind eyes behind wire-rimmed glasses. His handshake was firm, and he looked at me like he was seeing a ghost. "You have your grandmother's eyes," he said softly. "Eleanor talked about you every time I saw her. She never stopped hoping she'd find you." He led us into his office where manila folders covered every surface. My life apparently required a lot of paperwork. "Eleanor was a remarkable woman," he continued, settling behind his desk. "She came to Cedar Valley as a young bride in 1952. Built that ranch from nothing with your grandfather. After he died, she could have sold it, moved to town, made things easier on herself. But she held on to it, said it was for family, said someday her family would come home. He opened the largest folder and pulled out a photograph. It showed a woman in her 30s standing in front of a white farmhouse, holding a baby. The woman had my dark hair and my stubborn chin. The baby was clearly my father. She kept this on her mantle until the day she died, Edward said, along with a baby picture of you that your mother sent her right after you were born. My throat tightened. Someone had kept my baby picture on their mantle. Someone had been thinking about me, missing me, for 17 years. The ranch has been maintained by a local family, the Phillips, Edward continued. Evelyn Phillips and her husband have been looking after the property since Eleanor got sick. The livestock, the crops, everything. They're good people, Hannah. They'll help you learn what you need to know. Learn what I need to know, I repeated. Edward smiled. Eleanor left you more than just land, child. She left you a working ranch. Cattle, horses, chickens, a vegetable garden that feeds half the county. It's not just property. It's a business, a way of life. I felt dizzy. 3 days ago, I'd been facing homelessness and minimum wage jobs. Now I apparently owned livestock. So, Edward said gently. He pulled out a sealed envelope with my name written in careful script. Buckeye. My hands trembled as I took the envelope. The paper was cream-colored and heavy, the kind of stationery people use for important things, for things that mattered. Quick to one of me, Francis asked. I nodded, not trusting my voice. Edward and Francis stepped out of the office, leaving me alone with the letter from the grandmother I'd never known. The envelope opened easily, as if it had been waiting for me. Inside was a single sheet of paper covered in the same careful handwriting, my name on the envelope. My dearest Hannah, it began, if you're reading this, then Edward has finally found you, and I am no longer here to welcome you home myself. I cannot tell you how sorry I am for that, or how much I have missed you every single day since your mother took you away. I had to stop reading and wipe my eyes. Someone had missed me. Someone had wanted me home. I know you must have questions, and I wish I could answer them all in person. Your father was the light of my life, Hannah. He was kind and strong and stubborn, just like you probably are. He would have been so proud of the young woman you've become. How could she know what kind of woman I'd become? We'd never met. I know the system hasn't been kind to you. Edward has kept me informed of what he could discover about your placements. I know you've been moved around, that you've felt unwanted. I want you to know that nothing could be further from the truth. You have been wanted, desperately, by someone who loves you more than you can imagine. The tears were coming faster now. I pressed the letter to my chest and tried to breathe. The ranch is yours now, Hannah. Not just the land and the buildings, but the life that goes with it. Eleanor Phillips and her family have been taking care of things, and they'll teach you everything you need to know. Don't be afraid to ask for help. People in Cedar Valley take care of their own, and you are one of their own now. One of their own. I'd never been one of anyone's own. There's a trunk in the attic of the house with photo albums and your father's things. There are letters I wrote to you over the years but never sent. There's a quilt I made for your bed, hoping someday you'd sleep under it. Everything I couldn't give you in person is waiting for you in that house. I had to put the letter down and walk to the window. Edward's office looked out over Main Street, where people were going about their evening routines. A woman was watering flowers in front of the diner. A man was loading supplies into a pickup truck. Normal people living normal lives in a place where I apparently belonged. The letter continued when I picked it up again. The letter was signed simply, quote 34. I sat in that office and cried harder than I had since I was a little girl. Not the silent tears I'd learned to shed in group homes, but the kind of sobbing that comes from the deepest places of grief and relief and overwhelming gratitude. When Francis and Edward came back in, they found me clutching the letter like a lifeline. She loved me, I whispered. She actually loved me. Edward's eyes were suspiciously bright. Quote 37. Francis squeezed my hand. Quote 38. I nodded, though I wasn't sure I was ready for anything. How do you prepare to see a place that's been waiting for you your whole life? The drive out to the ranch took 15 minutes on roads that got progressively narrower and more rural. We passed fields of corn and wheat, pastures dotted with cattle, farmhouses set back from the road with long driveways and wraparound porches. It was like driving into a different world, one where space wasn't a luxury and silence wasn't something to be afraid of. Edward said, pointing ahead. Quote 40. The Stewart Ranch spread out before us like something from a movie. The main house was a two-story white farmhouse with green shutters and a wraparound porch that looked like it was built for sitting and watching sunsets. There was a red barn that could have housed a small airplane, and several outbuildings scattered around the property. Pastures stretched as far as I could see, dotted with cattle that looked up curiously as our car approached. But what took my breath away was the garden. Even from the road, I could see neat rows of vegetables, fruit trees heavy with apples, and flower beds that blazed with color in the evening light. Someone had been taking care of this place with love. A pickup truck was parked in the driveway, and as we pulled up, a woman emerged from the house. She was probably in her 50s, with graying blonde hair pulled back in a practical ponytail and clothes that spoke of a day spent working outdoors. She approached our car with the confident stride of someone comfortable in her own skin. Quote 41, Edward said. Quote 42. Evelyn's smile was warm and genuine as I climbed out of Frances's car. Quote 40, she said, extending a work-roughened hand. Quote 40, I shook her hand, noting the strength in her grip. Quote 40, and Evelyn laughed, a sound like wind chimes. Quote 46, she led us up onto the porch, where rocking chairs sat ready for evening conversations. The front door was painted the same green as the shutters, with a wreath of dried flowers hanging from a brass knocker. Quote 47, Evelyn said, turning the handle. Quote 48. The inside of the house took my breath away. It was like stepping into a Norman Rockwell painting. The living room had overstuffed furniture arranged around a stone fireplace, with quilts draped over the backs of chairs and family photos covering every surface. The kitchen was huge, with a farmhouse table that could seat 8 and windows that looked out over the garden. But it was the mantel that made me stop breathing. There, in a place of honor between a wedding photo and a picture of my father in his high school graduation cap, was a baby picture of me. Just like Edward had said, someone had looked at my face every day for 17 years. Evelyn said softly, following my gaze. I walked over and picked up the photo. I was maybe 6 months old, grinning a toothless baby grin at whoever was behind the camera. On the back, in my mother's handwriting, it said, Hannah Rose Stewart, 6 months old. She has your eyes, Eleanor. She has your eyes, I whispered, reading the inscription aloud. She did, Evelyn confirmed. Same dark brown, same shape. Eleanor used to say she could see your soul in your eyes, even in that baby picture. Frances was exploring the kitchen, opening cabinets and running her hands over the worn wooden countertops. Hannah, this is incredible. It's like a museum of family history. She was right. Every surface held evidence of the life I should have had. School photos of my father from kindergarten through high school. Report cards saved in a shoebox. A bronze pair of baby shoes that must have been his. Ribbons from county fair competitions dating back decades. Eleanor was a champion pie baker, Evelyn explained, noticing me looking at the blue ribbons. Won the county fair 15 years running with her apple pie. The recipes in that box on the counter, along with all her other recipes. She always said she was saving them for her granddaughter. I opened the recipe box with shaking hands. Inside were hundreds of index cards covered in Eleanor's careful handwriting. Apple pie, Sunday pot roast, Christmas cookies, birthday cake. Instructions for feeding a family, for creating traditions, for making a house into a home. I whispered. Edward said gently. Quote 60. Evelyn showed us through the rest of the house. There were 4 bedrooms upstairs, including one that had clearly been prepared for me. The bed was made with a quilt in shades of blue and green, and the dresser held a collection of things a teenage girl might like. Books, a jewelry box, even some clothes in what turned out to be exactly my size. Quote 61. Evelyn explained. Quote 62. The closet held more clothes, all in styles I would have chosen for myself if I'd had the money. Jeans and flannel shirts, a few dresses for special occasions, even boots that fit perfectly when I tried them on. But it was the trunk in the attic that completely undid me. The attic was accessed by a pull-down ladder in the upstairs hallway. Evelyn climbed up first, then helped me navigate the narrow opening. The space under the eaves was surprisingly large and well-organized, with boxes labeled in Eleanor's neat handwriting. But dominating the center of the space was an old steamer trunk with brass corners and leather straps. Quote 63. Evelyn said, running her hand over the trunk's worn surface. Said everything important was in here. The trunk wasn't locked. The brass latches opened easily, as if they'd been waiting for my touch. Inside was a treasure trove of memories I'd never known existed. Photo albums filled the top layer. Eleanor had documented every stage of my father's life, from his first steps to his high school graduation to the day he left for the construction job where he'd meet my mother. But scattered throughout the albums were empty spaces, marked with little notes. Spaces where my pictures should have been, where Eleanor had hoped my pictures would be. Under the photo albums were letters, dozens of them, all addressed to me in Eleanor's handwriting. Birthday letters, Christmas letters, letters marking holidays and achievements she'd imagined I might have. I opened one at random, dated on my 10th birthday. Quote 68. It began, quote 69. I had to stop reading and wipe my eyes. She'd made me birthday cakes for birthdays I'd spent alone in foster homes, eating grocery store cupcakes if I was lucky. Quote 70, Evelyn said softly. Quote 71. Under the letters were my father's things. His high school yearbooks, his baseball trophies, his favorite books, a leather jacket that still smelled faintly of cologne, work boots that were worn soft from years of construction sites. Everything Eleanor had kept of her son, save for the daughter she'd never met. At the very bottom of the trunk was a manila folder thick with official-looking documents. Inside were copies of every letter Eleanor had written to social services, every inquiry she'd made to private investigators, every legal avenue she'd pursued trying to find me. The paper trail of 17 years of searching. I whispered, looking through page after page of correspondence. Evelyn confirmed. Quote 75. I closed the folder and looked around the attic. This wasn't just storage space. This was a shrine to hope, a monument to the love of a woman who'd spent 17 years preparing for a reunion she'd never lived to see. I need some air, I said suddenly. The weight of all this love, all this longing, was overwhelming. Evelyn nodded understandingly. Let's go see the rest of the property. Eleanor always said the land would tell you everything you needed to know about her. We climbed down from the attic and walked out into the evening air. The sun was setting behind the barn, painting the sky in shades of pink and gold. The air smelled of hay and growing things, and the promise of rain. Luis Castillo was waiting by the barn, a man in his 60s with the weathered face of someone who'd spent his life outdoors. His handshake was firm, and his eyes were kind. Quote 78, he said simply, quote 7. He showed me through the barn, explaining the layout with the patience of someone who understood that I was starting from zero. There were stalls for horses, though only 2 were currently occupied. A hayloft that smelled like summer, equipment I couldn't begin to identify, but that Lewis assured me I'd learned to use. Quote 80 he explained. Quote quote I admitted. Lewis smiled. Quote we walked through the pastures as the stars came out. The cattle were settling down for the night, dark shapes against the darkening grass. In the distance, I could see the lights of other farmhouses, neighbors I'd never met who were apparently part of my world now. It's so quiet, I said. Different from the city. Lewis agreed. Takes some getting used to. But once you adjust, you'll find it's not really quiet at all. There's always something to hear if you listen. Nightbirds, cattle settling, wind in the trees. The land talks to you if you know how to listen. We ended up back at the house where Frances was sitting on the porch with a cup of coffee. She looked more relaxed than I'd seen her in years. Corsetta, she said, quote 8. But it didn't feel like a fairy tale to my time. It felt like coming home to a place I'd never been, to a life I'd never lived but somehow belonged to. It felt like the missing piece of myself that I'd been searching for without even knowing I was searching. That night, I slept in the bed Eleanor had prepared for me, under the quilt she'd made with her own hands. The room smelled faintly of lavender, and moonlight streamed through windows that looked out over pastures that belonged to me. I'd never owned anything before, and now I owned more land than I could walk across in a day. But ownership felt like the wrong word. Stewardship, maybe. Inheritance, certainly. But this place didn't feel like something I owned so much as something I belonged to. I woke before dawn to the sound of roosters crowing and cattle lowing in the distance. For a moment, I didn't know where I was. Then I remembered, and the reality of it hit me all over again. I was home. I was actually home. Frances had to leave that morning to get back to Ohio and her other cases. We stood by her car in the early morning light, both of us trying not to cry. Quote 89. She asked for the 10th time. Quote 90. I shook my head. Quote 91. Frances hugged me tight. Quote 92. After she left, I stood in the driveway feeling suddenly alone. Not the familiar alone of foster care, but the alone of being responsible for something bigger than myself. 300 acres, livestock, a house full of memories, and no idea what I was doing. Evelyn appeared at my elbow as if she'd sensed my panic. First day's always the hardest, she said. Come on, let's start with the chickens. They're the easiest to understand. The chicken coop was behind the house, a neat structure that looked like a miniature barn. Inside, dozens of hens clucked and fussed, eyeing me with the suspicious intelligence of creatures who knew I was an amateur. They lay eggs, you collect eggs, you feed them. They're happy, Theo, Evelyn explained, demonstrating the process. Eleanor always said chickens were the best teachers for new farmers because they let you know right away if you're doing something wrong. I reached into a nesting box and pulled out a warm brown egg. It was such a simple thing, but I'd never held an egg that had come directly from a chicken before. Everything I'd ever eaten had come from a grocery store, processed and packaged and removed from its source. This is incredible, I said, cradling the egg like it was made of gold. Evelyn smiled. Wait until you taste them. Eleanor's chickens lay the best eggs in the county. There's a standing order at the diner in town for 24 a week. We spent the morning going through the daily routines. Collecting eggs, checking on the cattle, watering the garden, feeding the horses. Each task was simple in itself, but together they formed a rhythm of life I'd never experienced. Purpose built into every hour, responsibility that felt meaningful instead of burdensome. The garden was overwhelming in the best possible way. Rows of tomatoes heavy with fruit, corn stalks taller than my head, bean plants climbing trellises with mathematical precision. Eleanor had planned it all, planted it all, tended it all while waiting for me to come home and help with the harvest. Quote 99, Sergeant. Evelyn explained, showing me how to tell when tomatoes were ready to pick. Quote 100, by noon I was exhausted but exhilarated. My hands were dirty, my clothes were stained with grill and chicken feed, and I'd never felt more alive. This was work that mattered, work that fed people and cared for animals and tended the earth. Lewis appeared for lunch, which Evelyn had prepared in Eleanor's kitchen, using Eleanor's recipes. Fried chicken from Eleanor's chickens, vegetables from Eleanor's garden, biscuits made from Eleanor's recipe box. It was the best meal I'd ever eaten, not just because the food was incredible, but because it connected me to the woman who'd loved me from a distance for so many years. Quote 100, Evelyn said, watching me savor every bite. Quote 102, after lunch, Louis took me out to see the cattle up close. They were massive, gentle creatures who regarded me with mild curiosity. Black Angus, he explained, bred for their meat and their easy temperament. Louis said, scratching one behind the ears. I watched the cattle graze in the afternoon sun, trying to imagine Eleanor standing in the same spot, learning these same lessons. She'd been young when she started, probably not much older than I was now. She'd figured it out, and so would I. That evening, I called Sharon Edwards, my former roommate at the group home. I'd promised to let her know how things were going, though I wasn't sure she'd believe me. Hannah? Sharon's voice was suspicious. I said, looking out the kitchen window at my pastures. Sharon laughed, but it wasn't a kind sound. Right, your ranch. What's the real story? Did you get arrested? Are you calling from jail? I inherited it from my grandmother, I said patiently. 300 acres, cattle, horses, the whole thing. Hannah, come on, you don't have a grandmother. You don't have any family. That's why you were in the system. I understood her disbelief. 3 days ago, I would have said the same thing. I know it sounds crazy, but it's true. My father's mother spent 17 years looking for me. She died 6 months ago and left me everything. There was a long pause. Then Sharon's voice, smaller now. Quote 100, quote 100, another pause. Quote, wham. I looked around Eleanor's kitchen at the recipe box and the family photos and the view of the garden through the window. It's like finding out you've been holding your breath your whole life and finally being able to breathe. The next few weeks passed in a blur of learning and discovery. Every day brought new challenges and new revelations about the life Eleanor had built and the legacy she'd left me. Evelyn and Lewis were patient teachers, showing me everything from how to check cattle for illness to how to preserve vegetables from the garden. But it was the evenings that meant the most to me. After the work was done and the animals were settled for the night, I'd sit in Eleanor's living room and read her letters. 17 years of birthday wishes and Christmas hopes and everyday thoughts she'd wanted to share with me. Through her words, I got to know the grandmother I'd never met. She'd been funny, writing about the chickens' personalities like they were soap opera characters. She'd been wise, offering advice about everything from boys to budgeting to believing in yourself. She'd been lonely, especially in the later letters, when her arthritis made the work harder and her heart condition kept her from doing everything she wanted to do. But through it all, she'd never stopped hoping I'd come home. One evening, about 3 weeks after I'd arrived, I was reading a letter she'd written on my 16th birthday when I heard a knock at the front door. It was after 8 o'clock, later than anyone usually visited. I opened the door to find a man about my age standing on the porch. He was tall and lean, with dark hair and work clothes that marked him as a local. His truck was parked in my driveway, and he held his hat in his hands like he was nervous. "You must be Hannah," he said. "I'm Tyler Edwards. My family has the ranch next to yours." Tyler Edwards. The name was familiar, but I couldn't place it at first. Then I remembered the boy at the group home who taunted me about being unwanted. Different Tyler Edwards, obviously, but the name still made me tense. "What can I do for you?" I asked, not inviting him in. He shifted his weight from foot to foot. "I wanted to welcome you to the neighborhood, I guess, and to tell you how sorry I was about Eleanor. She was a good woman, helped my family out more times than I can count." His sincerity was evident, and I relaxed a little. "Thank you. I'm still learning about her, about this place." "She talked about you all the time," Tyler said. "Every time I'd come over to help with something, she'd tell me about her granddaughter who was going to come home someday. I think half the county knew about you before you even got here. That was both comforting and intimidating." "I hope I don't disappoint anyone." Tyler smiled, and it transformed his serious face. "From what Lewis and Evelyn tell me, you're doing just fine. Takes guts to jump into ranch life with no experience." We talked for a few more minutes about the area, the neighbors, the best places to buy feed and supplies. Tyler was easy to talk to, and I found myself relaxing for the first time since I had arrived. It was nice to talk to someone my own age who didn't look at me with pity or suspicion. "If you ever need anything," he said as he prepared to leave, "anything at all, we're just over the hill. My mom makes the best apple pie in 3 counties, and she's been wanting to meet Eleanor's granddaughter since the day you arrived." After he left, I sat on the porch and looked out over my land in the moonlight. For the first time since I'd arrived, I felt like maybe I could do this. Maybe I could build a life here, become the person Eleanor had believed I could be. The next morning brought my first real crisis. I was in the barn checking on the horses when I heard Lewis shouting from the pasture. I ran outside to find him standing over a cow that was clearly in distress. "To 129, he said grimly. Quote 130. I'd never seen anything give birth before, and I certainly didn't know anything about cattle emergencies. But something in Lewis's voice told me this was serious, potentially life or death serious. "What can I do?" I asked. "Call Dr. Lauren Evans," Lewis said, already moving toward the cow. "Her number's on the board in the kitchen. Tell her it's an emergency at the Stewart place." I ran to the house and made the call, my hands shaking as I dialed. "Doctor." Evans said she'd be there in 20 minutes. But 20 minutes felt like forever when you were watching an animal suffer. I ran back to the pasture where Lewis was kneeling beside the cow, speaking to her in soothing tones. "Darn," he was saying. Quote worded. Quote umern. I asked. Lewis's expression was grim. "Don't know. This is her first calf, and she's having a hard time of it. Eleanor always said the first ones were the hardest." We waited in the morning sun, Louis monitoring the cow while I felt helpless and useless. This was my ranch, my responsibility, and I didn't know how to help. Dr. Evans arrived in a truck loaded with veterinary equipment. She was a woman in her 40s with graying red hair and the calm competence of someone who'd seen every kind of animal emergency. She assessed the situation quickly and got to work. "First calf?" she asked Louis, who nodded. "Thought so. She's just scared and tense. Sometimes they need a little help relaxing." What followed was a masterclass in veterinary medicine and animal husbandry. Dr. Evans worked with quiet efficiency, explaining what she was doing as she helped guide the calf into the world. I watched in fascination and terror, amazed by the raw reality of birth and death and the thin line between them. Finally, after what felt like hours but was probably only minutes, a wet, gangly calf slid into the world. The mother cow immediately began cleaning her baby, her distress forgotten in the face of maternal instinct. "There we go, doctor," Evans said, stripping off her gloves. "Mama and baby are both fine. She'll know what to do from here." I stood there watching the calf try to stand on wobbly legs, overwhelmed by what I'd just witnessed. This was life in its most basic form. "Birth and survival in the continuation of generations," Lewis said softly. As summer turned to fall, I settled into the rhythm of ranch life with growing confidence. The daily chores became routine, the animals became familiar, and the land began to feel truly mine. I'd learned to collect eggs without getting pecked, to drive the old pickup truck without stalling, and to tell when the tomatoes were perfectly ripe. But more than that, I'd begun to understand what Eleanor had been trying to preserve for me. This wasn't just a ranch. It was a way of life, a connection to the land and the seasons and the cycles of growth and harvest. It was a place where work had meaning and where every day brought tangible results. The people of Cedar Valley had welcomed me with a warmth that still surprised me. Tyler Edwards had become a regular visitor, often stopping by after his own chores were done to help with projects around the ranch. His mother, Sharon Edwards, had indeed made me the promised apple pie, along with a dozen other dishes designed to put some meat on my bones. The diner in town had become a regular stop for my weekly egg deliveries. Lauren Evans, the veterinarian, had taught me basic animal care and invited me to assist with routine calls around the county. Even Edward Nelson, the lawyer, had become something like a grandfather figure, checking in regularly and helping me navigate the legal and financial aspects of ranch ownership. But it was the discovery of Eleanor's journals that truly changed everything. I found them in her bedroom, in the drawer of her nightstand. 5 leather-bound books covering the years since my father's death. They were private thoughts, never meant for anyone else to read, but they told the story of a woman's love for a granddaughter she'd never met. The entries started when I was 6 months old, right after my mother disappeared with me. Eleanor's grief and determination were evident on every page. Quote 1045 she'd written, "I will bring my granddaughter home. Charles's daughter will know where she comes from, will know she is loved." Year after year, the entries documented her search efforts, her hopes, her fears. She'd written about the birthdays she'd celebrated alone, the Christmas presents she'd bought and saved, the rooms she'd prepared and kept ready. But she'd also written about her daily life, her struggles with the ranch, her relationships with neighbors and friends. Through her words, I got to know not just the grandmother who'd loved me, but the woman who'd lived a full life while never giving up hope. One entry, written just 6 months before she died, stopped me cold. I sat in Eleanor's bedroom and cried for the woman who'd loved me so much and never got to hold me. But they weren't tears of sadness anymore. They were tears of gratitude for a love so strong it had reached across 17 years and hundreds of miles to bring me home. That night, I made a decision that had been building for weeks. I called Frances in Ohio. "Hannah," she said, her voice bright with pleasure. "How are things going?" "Good," Ateta said. "Really good." "Frances, I want to finish high school here. I want to graduate from Cedar Valley High." There was a pause. "Are you sure you'd be starting your senior year at a new school with people you don't know?" "I'm sure," I said, looking out at my pastures in the moonlight. "This is home now. I want to graduate from my hometown." Frances was quiet for a long moment. "Eleanor would be so proud of you," she finally said. "You found your place in the world." Starting school in Cedar Valley was intimidating, but not in the way I'd expected. Instead of being the unwanted foster kid, I was Eleanor Stewart's granddaughter, the girl who'd inherited the Stewart Ranch. People knew who I was before I introduced myself. My first day, the principal, David Murphy, welcomed me personally, he said. The other students were curious but friendly. Many of them had known Eleanor, had bought vegetables from her garden or eggs from her chickens. They shared stories about her that helped me understand the woman she'd been in the community. She always gave us extra tomatoes, one girl told me, said growing kids needed good food. She sponsored our 4-H club for years, another added, taught half the county how to can vegetables. But it was Tyler Edwards who helped me navigate the social aspects of high school. He was a year ahead of me, popular but not arrogant, the kind of person everyone liked and trusted. Don't try to be someone else, he advised when I worried about fitting in. Eleanor's granddaughter is exactly who you're supposed to be. He was right. For the first time in my life, my identity was something to be proud of instead of something to hide. I wasn't the unwanted foster kid anymore. I was Hannah Stewart, Eleanor's granddaughter, the girl who'd come home to the ranch. The academic work was challenging but manageable. I'd always been a good student, and my teachers were supportive and encouraging. More importantly, I finally had a reason to plan for the future. I was thinking about agricultural college, about learning modern farming techniques, about ways to honor Eleanor's legacy while building my own. Fall harvest season was a revelation. The garden produced more vegetables than I could have imagined, and I spent weekends at the farmer's market in town, selling Eleanor's tomatoes and peppers and corn. The customers remembered her, and they welcomed me as her successor. One regular customer told me, winter brought a different kind of beauty to the ranch and a different rhythm to the days. The garden was dormant, the cattle moved to winter pastures, and the pace of life slowed to match the shortened days. But instead of feeling isolated, I felt cocooned in warmth and belonging. I'd been living at the ranch for 6 months, and it truly felt like home now. I knew every inch of the property, every animal by sight, every neighbor by name. The work was still challenging, but it was the good kind of challenge that builds character and confidence. Tyler had become my closest friend and something more, though we were taking things slowly. He understood ranch life in a way that city kids never could, and he respected both my independence and my connection to Eleanor's legacy. Quote 167. He told me one evening as we sat on the porch watching the sunset. Quote 1 He was right. I did belong here. Not just because Eleanor had left me the ranch, but because I'd made it mine through months of hard work and learning and growing. I'd earned my place here. The winter also gave me time to explore more of Eleanor's things, to piece together the full story of her life and my father's childhood. I found his school projects in the attic, his report cards, his letters home from the construction job where he'd met my mother. One letter written just weeks before he died mentioned me specifically. Mom, I can't wait for you to meet Hannah. She's got your stubborn streak and my mother's eyes. You're going to love her so much. He'd been right about that, even if Eleanor never got the chance to meet me while he was alive. Spring brought new challenges and new joys. Calving season meant sleepless nights and constant vigilance, but also the miracle of new life. I assisted with several births, no longer squeamish about the messy reality of bringing animals into the world. The garden came back to life under my care, planted according to Eleanor's detailed notes, but with my own additions. I added herbs she'd never grown, flowers she'd never tried, expanding on her foundation while respecting her wisdom. My senior year of high school flew by in a blur of classes and ranch work and college applications. I decided on agricultural studies at Montana State, close enough to come home on weekends, but far enough to challenge me academically. Graduation day was bittersweet. I walked across the stage as Hannah Stewart, accepting my diploma in front of a community that had embraced me as one of their own. But I couldn't help thinking about Eleanor, wishing she could have been there to see me graduate. After the ceremony, Tyler found me by the truck, still in my cap and gown. She was there, he said simply. Eleanor was there. She's been with you through all of this. He was right. I felt her presence in everything I did, every decision I made, every success I achieved. Her love had brought me home, and her legacy continued to guide me forward. Besides, that summer I hired my first employee, a young man named Charles Lopez, who reminded me of my father. He was eager to learn and willing to work hard, and he brought fresh energy to the ranch operations. "This place has good bones," he told me after his first week. "Eleanor built something that will last for generations." I hoped he was right. I wanted to build on Eleanor's foundation, to create something that would honor her memory while serving the community she'd loved. The farmer's market had become a regular part of my week, and my customer base was growing. People sought out, quote, 174 grown on Eleanor's land by Eleanor's granddaughter. It was a responsibility I took seriously, maintaining the quality and care that had made her produce legendary in Cedar Valley. One Saturday morning, a woman approached my stand with tears in her eyes. She was about Eleanor's age, with silver hair and a kind face. "You don't know me," she said, "but I knew your grandmother. We were best friends for 40 years. Her name was Evelyn Phillips, and she had stories about Eleanor that filled in gaps I didn't even know existed. They'd been young mothers together, had weathered the loss of their husbands, had supported each other through decades of joys and sorrows. Eleanor talked about you every single day," Evelyn told me. "She never doubted that you'd come home eventually. She used to say that love like hers doesn't just disappear, it finds a way." As my first year at the ranch drew to a close, I realized that Eleanor had given me more than land and livestock, and a house full of memories. She'd given me roots, identity, purpose, and belonging. She'd shown me what it meant to love someone so completely that time and distance couldn't diminish it. I thought about the girl who'd left the group home a year ago with nothing but a duffel bag and a heart full of hurt. That girl had been searching for something without even knowing what it was. She'd found it here, in the love of a grandmother who'd never stopped believing in her. College brought new challenges and opportunities, but it also reinforced my commitment to the ranch and to Eleanor's legacy. I studied sustainable agriculture and modern farming techniques, always thinking about how to apply what I learned to improve the operation back home. My professors were impressed by my practical experience and my deep connection to the land. Many of my classmates were from farming families, but few had the kind of personal investment in their future that I carried with me every day. Quote one professor observed, quote, "I came home every weekend, sometimes bringing classmates who were curious about ranch life. Tyler, now studying agricultural engineering at the same university, often joined these visits. Our relationship had deepened over the years, built on shared values and mutual respect for the land and the life it supported. The ranch continued to thrive under my management, with help from Lewis and Evelyn and the seasonal workers I hired for planting and harvest. I'd expanded the vegetable operation, added a small orchard, and begun selling directly to restaurants in the county seat. But it was the discovery of Eleanor's final project that truly amazed me. I found it in the barn, hidden behind stacks of hay bales, a workshop filled with woodworking tools and half-finished projects. Eleanor had been making furniture, beautiful pieces crafted from wood grown on the ranch property, tables and chairs and cabinets, all designed with the kind of attention to detail that spoke of love and patience. In a notebook beside the workbench, she'd written detailed plans for each piece, along with notes about who they were intended for. A dining table for Hannah's first home, a rocking chair for Hannah's baby someday, a hope chest for Hannah's wedding treasures. She'd been building a future for me, piece by piece, even when she didn't know if I'd ever come home to claim it. I spent that summer learning woodworking, following Eleanor's plans and techniques. It was meditative work, requiring patience and precision, and it connected me to her in a new way. Every cut of the saw, every stroke of the sandpaper was a conversation across time with the grandmother who'd prepared so carefully for my homecoming. Tyler helped me finish the dining table, and we placed it in the kitchen where Eleanor had always eaten her meals alone. The first dinner I served on that table was for the Phillips family, the people who'd cared for Eleanor's ranch and welcomed me home. Quote what from Evelyn said, running her hand over the smooth wood surface. Quote what to Mom. My junior year of college, I received an unexpected visitor. Frances Clark, my former social worker, came to Montana for a conference and drove out to see the ranch. I hadn't seen her in over a year, and I was nervous about what she might think of the changes in my life. She stood in the driveway for a long moment, taking in the well-maintained buildings, the thriving garden, the cattle grazing peacefully in the distance. "Hannah," she said finally, "this is incredible. You've built something amazing here." We walked through the property, and I showed her everything Eleanor had left me and everything I'd added or improved. Frances listened to my plans for the future, my dreams of expanding the operation while maintaining its sustainable practices. She said as we sat on the porch that evening, I said thinking of Eleanor's love reaching across the years to guide me home. I had someone who never stopped believing in me, even when I didn't know she existed. Frances nodded. Eleanor's love made the difference, but you made the choice to embrace it, to build on it, to honor it. That takes courage and character. As my college graduation approached, I faced a decision that would have seemed impossible just a few years earlier. I'd been accepted to graduate school in agricultural economics, with the possibility of a career in agricultural policy or research. It was an opportunity that could take me far from Cedar Valley, into a world of influence and prestige, but it would also take me away from the ranch, from the community that had become my family, from the legacy Lenore had entrusted to me. The decision became clear one morning as I walked through the pastures, checking on the cattle in the early dawn light. This was where I belonged. This was the work that mattered to me. This was the life Eleanor had envisioned for me, and it was the life I wanted for myself. I turned down the graduate school offer and committed fully to the ranch and to Cedar Valley. Tyler, who'd been holding his breath waiting for my decision, proposed that same week with a ring he'd made himself from a piece of Eleanor's silver jewelry. I want to build a life with you here, he said, kneeling in Eleanor's garden. Quote 194. Our wedding was held on the ranch under the apple trees Eleanor had planted decades earlier. The entire community came to celebrate, filling the pastures with laughter and music and joy. Lewis walked me down the aisle and Evelyn stood as my matron of honor. Frances flew in from Ohio to witness the ceremony, but the most meaningful moment came when Tyler and I exchanged vows we'd written ourselves, promising to honor Eleanor's legacy and to build a future worthy of her love and sacrifice. I said, looking out over the faces of people who'd become my family, her love reached across time and space to create this moment, this community, this home. 5 years have passed since that wedding day, and the ranch has become everything Eleanor dreamed it could be. Tyler and I have expanded the operation, adding a small dairy herd and a farm-to-table restaurant that serves produce grown on Eleanor's land. We employ a dozen people from the community, providing good jobs and supporting local families. But the most important addition to the ranch came 3 years ago. Our daughter, Eleanor Rose Edwards. She's the spitting image of her great-grandmother, with the same dark eyes and stubborn chin. She toddles through the garden on unsteady legs, chattering to the chickens and picking flowers for her grandmother, Evelyn Phillips, who helps care for her while Tyler and I work. Eleanor Rose will grow up knowing where she comes from, surrounded by love and belonging and the security of deep roots. She'll know the story of her great-grandmother's love, the woman who never gave up hope and whose legacy continues to shape our family's future. The house is full of life now in a way it never was during Eleanor's final years. Children's laughter echoes through rooms that once held only memories. The kitchen table Eleanor dreamed of is surrounded by family and friends every Sunday, loaded with food grown on our land and prepared with love. I've kept Eleanor's room exactly as she left it, a shrine to the woman who made all of this possible. Sometimes I sit in her chair and read her journals, still learning from her wisdom and drawing strength from her example. The trunk in the attic has been joined by new treasures: Eleanor Rose's first shoes, photos of our wedding, letters from Frances, who still visits every year. The collection of memories continues to grow, building on Eleanor's foundation while creating new traditions for future generations. Last month, I received a call from a social worker in California. A teenage boy in foster care had been identified as a distant relative, a great nephew of Eleanor's, through her first husband's family. He was aging out of the system with nowhere to go, no family connections, no support network. Tyler and I didn't hesitate. We flew to California and brought David Murphy home to Cedar Valley, just as Eleanor would have done. He's 17, angry, suspicious, and convinced that nobody could possibly want him. He reminds me of myself at that age, before I learned what it meant to belong somewhere. David is living in the guest room, learning ranch work, and finishing high school in Cedar Valley. It's challenging, just as it was challenging for me to learn this new life. But every day he relaxes a little more, trusts a little more, begins to believe that maybe he's found a place where he belongs. Quote 197. He asked me last week after I'd spent an hour teaching him to drive the tractor. Because someone did it for me, I said simply. Because love doesn't end with one generation. It keeps growing, keeps reaching out, keeps bringing people home. Eleanor's love story didn't end with her death. It continues in every choice I make, every person I welcome, every tradition I maintain. It lives in the vegetables I grow in her garden, the animals I care for in her pastures, the community I serve in her name. I think about that scared, angry girl who left the group home with nothing but a duffel bag and a heart full of hurt. She thought she was unwanted, unloved, destined for a life of struggle and loneliness. She had no idea that somewhere in Montana, a grandmother's love was preparing a place for her, creating a legacy that would transform not just her life, but the lives of everyone she'd touch. That's the power of love that doesn't give up. Love that reaches across time and space and impossible circumstances to bring people home. Eleanor's love brought me home to a place I'd never been, to a family I'd never known existed, to a life I'd never dared to dream possible. Now it's my turn to be the one who doesn't give up, who keeps the door open, who believes in the power of love to transform lives. David is just the beginning. There will be others, other young people who need to know they're wanted, they're valued, they have a place in this world. The ranch that Eleanor built as a monument to hope has become a beacon for anyone who needs to know that home is possible, that family can be chosen, that love really does find a way. Every morning when I walk through the pastures in the early light, I feel Eleanor's presence in the wind through the grass, in the lowing of the cattle, in the promise of another day to honor her legacy. She never got to hold me, never got to see me graduate or get married or become a mother. But her love shaped every moment of those milestones, made them possible, gave them meaning. This is what I want you to know if you're listening to this story and recognizing something of yourself in that scared girl with the duffel bag. You are wanted. You are loved. Somewhere in this world, there's a place where you belong, people who will welcome you home, a future that's waiting for you to claim it. Don't give up hope. Don't stop believing that your story can have a different ending than the one you've imagined. Love has a way of reaching across impossible distances to bring us exactly where we need to be. I'd love to hear your story in the comments below. Have you ever experienced unexpected family connections? Have you found belonging in places you never expected? Share your experiences, and let's build a community of people who believe in the power of love to transform lives. And if this story touched you, please share it with someone who might need to hear that they're wanted, they're loved, they have a place in this world. Eleanor's love brought me home to Cedar Valley, Montana. But the real home she gave me was the knowledge that I belong somewhere, that I matter to someone, that my life has purpose and meaning. That's a gift I'll spend the rest of my life passing on to others, just as she passed it on to me across 17 years of hope and faith and unshakable love. Welcome home, wherever you are. Welcome to the family of people who refuse to give up on love.